Frogger.
Frogger. Who said Frogger? You go, girl.
Baldur's Gate.
Go, girl. 10 seconds left. Let's do a countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, everybody. Welcome to Analyzing Video Games Through the Lens of Art History. My name is Ryan Grady. You can call me Miss Ryan. And let me go ahead and tell you why you should listen to me about this topic. I started out as a fine artist. Now, if we wanted to go way back, I got into art because Pokemon. But I started out as a fine artist. I have my undergraduate degree in, my concentration was actually fibers. Yes, very far from video games. And I was a pretentious fine artist. I went to schoolyards before that. I did performance art. I rolled 200 tennis balls down a hill and called it art. I did some crazy stuff. And as I went through my journey, I ended up wanting to create art for games, which perfectly is what the class I teach at, primarily at Wake Tech Community College. Can I get a holler from my students, please? Yes. That was actually not as loud as I was expecting. But, so knowing that I wanted to do animation, illustration, 3D modeling, etc., I ended up going to get my master's at NC State University in new media and animation. Some of the things that I've worked on, I've actually helped design simulations to teach third graders science concepts. So one of the games that we made helped them understand buoyancy with a haptic controller, and I designed all the art assets and it's part of the interaction. And guys, they have controllers now that make you feel forces. That's crazy. Think about VR in that. So it was very exciting, and of course I 3D model and do animation and illustration in my own time. When I'm not teaching my wonderful students, I come home and I draw every day. And one of the things that influences me and what I see and what I teach in games is art history, is that fine art background. And it's funny, whether it's gamers like you, game developers, people off the street, awkward friends of my parents, there's a question that I get all the time. And that question is, are video games art? And I'm here to tell you, you can write it down in your diary, that this is a stupid, stupid question. I put stupid twice accidentally because I feel so strongly about it. And the reason that this is a stupid question is because video games has long tested and get with our standards of what we think art is. Despite Robert Ebert's claims that video games could never be art. Yes. It's okay. My students like to do that too sometimes. So, sorry about that, everybody.
It's very scary.
Despite his claims that video games could never be art, they have been embraced by museums, gallery, and even the Smithsonian Institute. They had a massive exhibit called The Art of Video Games. Even our own NCMA, the North Carolina Museum of Art, if you go down to the street across from the fairgrounds, they're having a new installation exhibit that is inspired by the same topics and design qualities that we have learned as game developers. It passed the museum test. You can put a video game on a pedestal if you really want to, if that is your definition. And that's why that is not what this talk is about. We need to stop asking whether video games are art and ask which video games are art. That means that we have to start analyzing games differently than before. Because there are years and years of artists, all of this history that we can look upon, that we can use as precedent to not only help us analyze our games, but also inspire us and see where video games are going to be in art history. But that means we have to answer some different questions too. Like, What are the qualities of an art piece, and how does that relate to video games? What qualities do certain games share with past artistic movements? And how can I apply this to practice? Why should you guys care? And we're going to talk about that today. In order to do so, I'm not going to talk about video games for 3 slides. Will you hang with me for 3 slides? Awesome! That's what I like to hear. Ooh, heavy stuff, you guys. Heavy stuff. So what is art? Well, guess what? If we need to talk about art or we need a definition, that somebody made Google. So I have a Google definition for you today. Art. I put creative work in quotations. I'll explain that in a moment. It's the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form, such as a painting, sculpture, or video game, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. When we're talking about what is art, what we're really asking is this creative work avant-garde? Is it original? Is it a good idea? And when we talk about creative work, we're actually talking about 3 different things. Some of you who are classically trained artists have heard about this topic to death, and I apologize to bring up those memories. Art, design, and craft. Now, there are an infinite number of definitions for each of these 3 things. And some people feel that you can only be one, that art can only be art, that design can only be design, that craft can only be craft. But I'm here to tell you, you can choose to accept it into your life or not, that these are really 3 different parts of the same process when we're making creative work. Now, we are going to, for the sake of this talk, define these as 3 different things. The art of something is the expression, the vision, the idea, the purpose, what makes it unique, your reason for existing. Art is the idea. Design is your methodology. It's creative problem solving. When someone calls themselves a designer, they're telling you that the primary role of their job is to solve a problem. So it's the method of creating the expression or communicating the idea. That's why a graphic designer's job is communication. So design is the methodology. Craft. Craft is the execution. It's how well you spin that potter's wheel. How good you are at what you do. How clean, how good your technique is. So craft is the execution. And just to push that in there even further, I got a lovely triforce for you with art, craft, and design, and then it relabeled that art is the idea, design is the method, and craft is the execution. And different art movements in art history fall on different parts of these triangle. They always have a little bit of art, a little bit of design, and a little bit of craft, but some of them have more than one thing than the other. Let's pretend for a moment that creating art or creating work is an RPG. And these are our stats, right? We can max out our stats. So if we max out our ideas, we have a good way to solve any problems, and we figure out how to communicate those ideas in a creative way, and then we execute them with excellent technique and craftsmanship, we get closer to a masterpiece, right? So something like conceptual art, which is where they hung a chair on the wall and then wrote right next to it chair and then gave it a title, that's going to be all about the idea. Something like Art Deco and the arts and crafts movement, where it's about beautifying people's homes and things of that nature, are going to be closer to design and craft. Something that is really about the technique and something more representational is going to be about craft. Do you guys think you're starting to feel this out a little bit? Don't worry, I have more for you. Almost back to video games, you guys. So different disciplines are close to have more than one of these things than the other as well. How many of you have ever seen a ballet or a modern dance piece? Anybody? So when I was at School of the Arts, the modern dancers and the ballet students were at war. Because ballet, according to the modern dancers, was not considered art. And according to the ballerinas, they said the modern dancers' technique was terrible. So they valued ideas over execution. And they were at war with each other. Well, if we look at video games as well, we can see that they have different focuses as well. Dear Esther, Heavy Rain, these games that challenge our idea of what video games can be. They're going to be more focused on the idea, the art of it. Things that are all about, hey, this is really interesting gameplay. We're going to create something that creates an interesting interaction that is well designed and will make people think. That gameplay element. That's where we have things like Tetris and Braid. And things that are more craft oriented, we have games that are very well done and really beautiful graphics. You know, our photorealistic games are going to be closer to that category. So now that we've played with our art, design, craft triforce for a moment, we can talk about how we're going to use these to compare them to art movements in history. So, art is going to, as it compares to video games, is going to focus on narrative, meaningful play. If you're not familiar with that term, you should read Rules of Play. Oh my gosh, I can't remember the author's name right now, but it's on my works cited. What is the message of your game? How do you want people to feel when they play your game? That's a really important question. Why am I playing this game? That's the idea. The method, gameplay, the interaction. I'm going to say that word a lot. Level design. How well does this game play? Craft, code, graphics, technology. Does this game run smoothly? Does it play smoothly? Is this a pleasant experience so I can go through the methodology and get the idea? Are you ready to do it? We're going to start looking at art movements. All right. Boom. First one, Impressionism, starting with the favorite. So, for those of you who don't know what Impressionism is, after the photograph, suddenly we had to start looking at art differently. So this is the turn of the century, you guys. We got cameras, and it's like, oh, can take a photo now, so I don't have to pay a portrait artist to have a picture of me. Which a lot of people who were doing arranged marriages didn't like as much because they could no longer hire someone to paint them prettier than they actually were. So we had to start thinking about the world and thinking about the art differently. And one of the things that Impressionists did is they saw the world through color and light. They used thick blobs of paint to not make a representational or photorealistic painting, but give you the sensation, the impression of a scene, person, a subject. And that's why we're attracted to pixel art games, right? They don't describe what the world should be. They give us a feeling. They give us an impression of the environment. So games like Protus, which are all about this infinite creation of world and exploration, we have new feelings. We can see a sunset. So both in gameplay and why we want to play these games and in actually what they're trying to do, they're similar to Impressionism. Because guess what pixel art is? It's dots of color to give you an impression of a scene. Boom, boom. It's a digital form of what the Impressionists are doing. And that's really inspiring. Cuphead's a popular topic today at ECGC. So how many of you are familiar with pop art? Anybody? Oh, yay! What's your impression of pop art? Okay, that's fine. You don't have to have... We're done with Impressionism anyway. So what was going on with pop art? Pop art, just like almost any art movement that changes the status quo, is they decided that they were going to take images from pop culture and reframe the context to give you something new. So in Andy Warhol's case, he took The Last Supper, a painting that already was created, blew it up about the size of this table right here, and had other students or people that worked for him screen print a fine art painting and then hung it on a gallery wall, reframing what our concepts of something being made is. Now, Cuphead isn't really like that. Cuphead is more close to an artist that, I'm going to say his name wrong because I always do, but we're just going to go for it, Roy Lichtenstein. And what he did, he took images of comics, right? Classic comic books. And he would blow up the scene and then hand paint each dot on this giant, big, whatever he was painting on. So what he was doing, he was taking something from the past that was already very visible in our culture. We understand it was part of history, and putting this manufactured thing with a hand touch. His hand was in it. It was classically painted in a way. And Cuphead does something very similar to that. Cuphead is done in the style of rubber hose animation. So it's taking this classic form of animation that was done a long time ago, and even hand drawing was part of the process, and reframing the context just like they did in pop art. And they actually developed digital techniques to make it look more like traditional work. It reframes images in our culture in a new way due to how it's made. But the challenge is, how does the gameplay relate to that? And that's one of the things that we can start doing when we're analyzing these games. Can we look at the lens of art history and let that inspire us for just visuals? Or what if we let it inspire art, craft, and design? The idea, the method, and the execution. That will give us something that's more complete. Because some of you may know, one of the Cuphead's problems is people were so excited about this game, and it's so beautiful, and then they started playing it, and it was very hard. So think about that when you're designing your games. How do your methods, your ideas, and your techniques connect, and how did previous artists do that? Here's one of my favorites. How many of you are familiar with Dada? Yes. So, back during World War I, people were sad. They were looking at lots of horrible things, and they decided that they were going to rebel against the frivolous nature of what we thought art should be. Oh, it's this fine thing that rich people go to view, and we're going to buy because a critic told me to buy it. Or it has to be on a pedestal. And they felt like this was bourgeois. They felt like this didn't accurately reflect the horrors that they saw in the world. So they decided that they were going to start making fun of art, and it became the new standard. So there was this guy called Duchamp, Marcel Duchamp, and he showed up to a gallery one day with a urinal, and he turned it upside down, wrote a name on it that wasn't even his name, but he signed it, so that makes it art, right? And put it up in a gallery. People were appalled, and he told them, I am the artist, and I selected this object, so therefore it is art. And suddenly that became a new standard. Welcome to lost objects or found object sculptures. But what it did, it turned our preconceived notions of what a game should be on its head. And these are what these ragdoll simulators that essentially make fun of game physics, and the fact, yeah, you're going to play as a goat. I can't think of a more ridiculous or Dada concept other than that. And break your expectations. And both gameplay as well. It doesn't control how you think a game should control. Think about any of these ragdoll games like Surgeon Simulator or Hand Simulator. Has anybody played Hand Simulator? it's pretty ridiculous. It doesn't feel like you have to grab a hand. It makes it difficult. Something that should feel natural suddenly is hard. Everything that's about good game feel, they play against, and that's why you want to play it. That's so Dada. The Stanley Parable. Sadly, I haven't been able to play much of the Stanley Parable, but I have played and seen a little bit. And one of the reasons I decided to include this on the slide is because it breaks the fourth wall. Thank you. This is why I have Sherry up front, everybody. The fourth wall so frequently, and it totally turns the idea of player reward on its head. How many of you are familiar with the concept of player reward? Okay, great. So a lot of times a cutscene or something like that, or a treasure, an item, is a reward for a player for accomplishing a task. And Stanley Parable basically says, we're not going to give you that. Oops, sorry. The cake is a lie. This one was a hard one. Because the thing is, arguably all horror games are somewhat inspired by German Expressionism. Because really, German Expressionists, especially in the film, are founders of the horror genre. Do any of you watch Cinemassacre? He's also the angry video game nerd. If you watch his series on Monster Madness, he talks about German Expressionist film and how it goes into horror and how that also translates to video games. Now, I talked about all that, and now you're like, Ryan, we don't know what German Expressionism is. So let's talk about that. This is another World War I. But unlike the Dadas, they decided not to make fun of what art was going on. They decided to actually represent visually the horrors that they had witnessed due to World War I. So we're getting a lot of symbolic imagery, a lot of very bold, heavy, almost angry looking lines. Things that are a little spooky. And one of the ones that represents this so well is Limbo. Because what Limbo does, it expresses the feeling of what it's like to be alone. It gives you these just very simple, bold visuals to make you feel what it'd be like to go through the horrors that this little boy is going through. Silent Hill does this a lot as well. Their streaky, stark, frankly scary imagery really makes you feel disoriented and afraid. But Silent Hill's not on this slide because it's on another slide. German Expressionism was definitely a huge inspiration to what we call Surrealism. But Surrealism isn't always a bad, spooky place. It's also often much more refined in its technique. A lot of classically trained artists will render almost photorealistically, are also surrealists. And what Surrealism is the visual representation or expression of dreams. Y'all know who Salvador Dali is? Every hand should be up right now. Like, if y'all don't know who Salvador Dali is, I just don't know what I'm going to do with myself. Salvador Dali is one of the most famous surrealists, and he's the artist that did the melting clocks. So we know that craftsmanship is important in surrealism, that it's also highly symbolic because it's a reflection of dreams. And we know that it plays with our perspectives or concepts. How many of you have played Monument Valley? So Monument Valley is, I'm going to back up. I recently read this book called Real Artists Don't Starve. And one of the things that it talks about is that there's no such thing as new ideas or new art. Being original is a lie, just like cake. But it's the collage of inspirations that truly create something fresh. And that's what Monument Valley did. What they did, they took inspirations from Asian and Indian art and combined that with concepts from N.C. Escher, a surrealist printmaker, I'm going to say. Thank you, Sherry. See, this is why she's up here, everybody. And that play of what we call isometric perspective is actually combined in the gameplay. This is a puzzle game. So it has beautiful, lush visuals that mess with our perspectives and feel very dreamlike, like Surrealism, straight up referencing a Surrealist artist, and incorporates that into the gameplay. That's very exciting. And then we have Monument Valley, and Silent Hill 2. How many of you have played Silent Hill 2? Because I don't want to spoil it for anybody.
It is very creepy.
Ooh, okay, not a lot of people. Well, let's just say it's very difficult to tell what's real and what's not. Sometimes you're in this area that feels like a normal town, and then suddenly you go into this Silent Hill part of the world. You can call it a dream world, you can call it something else. And it is very spooky, there's lots of blood, and there's these nurses. This very dreamlike. Now the image on the left is an image called The Burning Giraffe by Salvador Dali. The image on the right is a nurse from Silent Hill. You can see that there's very similar qualities to it, because both of these were trying to mess with human psychology and represent human psychology. And the thing is, Silent Hill didn't have to go far. All they had to do is Google the most famous Surrealist artist, Salvador Dali. Here's my favorite slide. Romanticism, Bloodborne, and the Souls franchise. How many of you, if you were to describe Bloodborne or Dark Souls, would describe it as Gothic? Yeah. Guys, Gothic is an architecture movement and a literature movement. But some feel that it is a subset of Romanticism. And the point of Romanticism is to make people feel things. It's all about what we call the sublime. And what the sublime means is that something is beautiful if it makes you feel a very powerful emotion. But it does not matter what that emotion is. It can be fear, disgust, hatred. But it can be happiness too. But it's about strong emotions and feeling a collage of emotions. So a lot of the imagery that we see in Romanticism include old ruins, trees, fog, skulls. One of the most famous romantic artists that you can ever look at is William Turner. Okay. Another one that you should write down is Goya. If you want to be freaked out and learn that Romanticism is not about romantic love, Google Saturn by Goya. It's going to be an interesting time. But if you look at the image on the right, which is a screenshot from Bloodborne, you can see that it's almost an exact reflection of the imagery that you see in the romantic paintings on the left. Now, previously when we talked about Cuphead, we were like, it's pop art in the art style, but is it pop art in the gameplay? We want a nice, complete Triforce, right? Well, what's Bloodborne in the Souls series most favorite for other than environmental storytelling?
Hard game.
It's hard. It's hard. It's a struggle, and everybody talks about, when I was fighting Gwendolyn, I did this, and I had this weapon, and I did the whole thing without a shield. It was so hard, I did it. I got so mad, I broke 2 controllers. That's your player experience. That's your player narrative, the secondary narrative of the game. And the reason that we keep on going back to this impossibly hard game is because it gives us such a strong emotion and makes us feel the sublime. It's sublime in its gameplay, romantic in its gameplay, and in its visuals. And those two work together in tandem with its environment and storytelling and its difficulty to give you a unique secondary narrative to create an amazing game. Sometimes we run into problems. Sometimes we have something called manufactured art. How many of you are familiar with Thomas Kinkade? I wish there was no one. Thomas Kinkade is a problem because what he does, he mass reproduces these genre scenes. These things that are very happy, simple, fluffy landscapes that he doesn't even paint himself. He gets them printed in mass and then puts a couple of strokes on them and sells them in stores around the world. And the problem with that is it saturates the art market, and people think that this is what art should be, and it's all what they think what art should be. And when they go to a museum like the NCMA, they look at paintings and say, my child could do that. Darling, if your child could do that, you would be rolling in dough. It is unfortunate. We do not want to oversaturate our market with mediocre art or games. And there are many franchises, especially in first-person shooters, where we're producing the same visuals over and over again, the same gameplay over and over again, and we're releasing the same game every year. This is a problem. But here's the thing. Games like this sell. Now, I referenced Call of Duty for this. If you look, Call of Duty is still a good game. Call of Duty is great. In fact, I'm about to talk about why Call of Duty is great. So just be prepared for the next slide. First-person shooters and Call of Duty games, games that come out a lot, they still make the most money. How many of you went to the keynote speaker? What game was number 4 in their top-selling games? Call of Duty World War II. So if these games sell, and guys, you gotta make money. Real artists don't starve, you guys. It's a perfectly noble goal to feed your dog and give them the life that they deserve. But how do we do that without oversaturating the market with the same thing? So why do we care? Why do we care about creating games that are art? How many of you have played baseball or softball? Okay, I'm going to talk about a batting lineup, but full disclosure, this is what my dad told me why I was the first up for batting. So it could be my dad just making me feel better, but it works for the metaphor. You good? All right. So in baseball or softball, you have this player lineup. And at the top of the lineup, your numbers 1 through 3, are people that are going to connect with the ball every single time. For the sake of this talk, we're going to call those people direct hitters. They're people that maybe can't hit it out of the park, but they're going to get on the bases. And then your 3 through 6 batters are the heavy hitters. They're the ones that can hit the ball out of the park. The reason that we put those people who make contact, our direct hitters, first is because they get on the bases. So when you have your heavy hitters come up, they hit it out of the park. These games that maybe make money, maybe they're re-releases of games that you love, like Zelda, Wind Waker released, Nintendo released Wind Waker before they released Breath of the Wild. They did an update, HD, and you better believe that was in people's minds when they bought Breath of the Wild. It's okay to make games that you know are going to make money. It just shouldn't be your only goal. Because you need heavy hitters to make your brand. Direct hitters, your games that you're going to pump out, those games that you make solely for making money, are what's going to fund your experimentations. So my indie developers, maybe you shouldn't put your baby, your favorite game out first. Maybe you should do something simple that you know you can execute, that you know that it will be popular before you put out your heavy hitter. Because here's the thing about heavy hitters. When we were in 1998, I'm going to go with 1998. I'm not good with dates. In 1998, Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire were competing to break the record for most home runs. Do y'all remember this? Anybody remember this? Yeah, it was a big deal. Now, we all talk about how many home runs that it took, but no one talks about how often they basically struck out, because you got to swing the bat to hit the ball and hit it out of the park. And that's a problem when we're creating games. Creating games is a huge undertaking. So Atari, you know, the game crashed. We were doing the same thing. We were putting too many games out too quickly without creating games that are memorable. That's what creating games that are art is about, is that creating games that are memorable. And if we're studying them in art history, and you have to take it because it's mandatory for a BFA or an MFA, you better believe you're going to remember it. So it's important to create games that are memorable. This works. But if you are just focusing on games that are memorable, you may starve to death. Journey saved that game company. I didn't know this. They were about to go bankrupt before they released Journey. It saved their company, but it may not save yours. Keeping your audience's interest without putting all of your eggs in one basket will help eliminate hype as well. Because we know that No Man's Sky, even though it was beautiful, did not live up to the hype. You need both direct hitters and heavy hitters for your brand. You need Wind Waker to come out to remind everybody about Breath of the Wild and why they want that. So I have a worksheet for you that includes questions that you can ask yourself while you are creating your idea, your methodology, and your execution for your game. I've also included a list of art movements. If this is something that you're interested in having, I would gladly send it to you. I also have my works cited. I highly recommend that you listen to the podcast about the art. That was anticlimactic. Hold on, I'm gonna get back in my groove. Yay! I highly recommend that you listen to the podcast about the Smithsonian's exhibition, The Art of Video Games. I also highly recommend that you read Rules of Play or watch Barry Kramer's video about immersion. It's going to give you a new idea of how you can not only combine visuals with your art inspirations and your elements from art history, but also the gameplay. Now, this is the end of the talk. I'm going to take any questions. I've included my website and my Instagram if you're interested in drawing things and you want to see other people draw things. That's my flow. My website is what's stationary. My Instagram is where you see all my in-progress stuff if you're interested. And of course, you should come to Wake Tech if you want to make video games. Yeah, it's amazing, right guys?
This Ryan's my favorite.
Woo! Are there any questions? Yes.
I noticed the art movements you picked were predominantly 19th and 20th century movements. Would you say those influence games today more than other ones?
The reason that I picked those is because they happened after photography. And before that, even though, as you know, there's some really bad medieval portraits out there, and even after the Renaissance, there's some unfortunate portraiture out there. Art was primarily representational. And there are plenty of photorealistic games out there. So I don't feel like I'm doing you a service. And I'm giving you all these art movements about what games are already doing. I want to give you some art movements that are going to take you beyond that and make history. And you know, video games is a relatively new medium. And we're following a similar timeline. Like before, we weren't able to create photorealistic games, but we wanted to make sure that we were showing the player everything that's going on. Well, guess what? That's what Egyptian artists did. They would show the front of the body, the side of the face, and the legs in profile, so you could see all parts of the body, and it was very clear as to what's going on. As technology increased, we learned more about how to create more representational games. So we have Greek art, the Hellenistic era. And then sometimes we lose sight, things get really ridiculous, and we go back to study what people did in history. That's the Renaissance. That's why I did turn of the century games, because I wanted to take you beyond neoclassicism. I wanted to take you beyond something representational.
What about outside the Western context, though? I know most of those are also Western ones. You say the other ones haven't influenced game as much?
Oh my gosh, I could talk. I could do a whole talk about just the intersection of Japanese art and Japanese aesthetics with American pop culture. I was trained at a Western school. This is my background. This is what I feel comfortable talking about. Anime has been one of the biggest influences in not just video games, but art, illustration. What's that?
Testify.
I will testify. So that's why I didn't include all of that. It's not that it hasn't influenced that. I mean, as we can see with Monument Valley, Indian art was a huge influence on that, with the saturated colors and things like that. But it's just not my area of expertise. That's why I chose not to include it. Does that make sense?
I know Dark Souls is a interesting fusion of both Western concepts and Japanese concepts. A lot of Japanese concepts influence a lot of their design and art decisions for the environment.
I won't try to take a long time doing this, but it's one of my favorite topics, so I'm just going to go for it. So, around Impressionism, we were able to finally start getting all these prints and all this cool stuff from Japan. And so it started, we started having all of these images of women in kimonos and things inspired by this, like Impressionism is inspired by Japanese brush painting. And so we started to see that. Well, we also started having, years and years later, Disney happened. So we have these artists, these printmakers and illustrators over in Japan looking at Disney. It's like, I want to give my characters big eyes. And Astro Boy was born. So then, American artists started looking over at Astro Boy and Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z and Cowboy Bebop and all of these amazing animes. It's like, whoa, this is blowing up and their art style is so cool. Well, we're going to start taking from them and make Teen Titans. So it's been this constant cycle. And it's, guys, in 100 years, art historians are going to flip their grits when they study how Japan's culture and American culture constantly recycles each other to create something truly unique, fresh, and ever-growing. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Anime games are life, and I love them.
Comments are thoroughly appreciated, but what about questions? Yes?
So you stopped at about surrealism. How would you say, can you think of any games that would be influenced by like abstract expressionism?
Oh, that game company's game Flow, a lot of rhythm games are influenced by that. Okay. There's a lot of strategy indie games that are very influenced by that. I also didn't do minimalism. If you look at Mountain or a lot of walk-around games, and what's the one, Super Hot? Is that the VR game?
Yeah.
That's definitely influenced by minimalism. I only have an hour.
It's okay, you got 15 minutes.
Have you played Thomas Was Alone? That's pretty minimalist.
I haven't.
And,
I haven't.
for sure.
There's so many games I want to play. But it's like I go home and I can either play games or do art. So, but I will definitely have to check that out.
Going back to the abstract expressionisms, Greenberg had his theory on modernist painting and how like each medium should have its own like niche and should you like get to the purest aspects of it. Do you think any games have like tried to reach that or like what that would be?
I don't think that there's very few games where that was the sole goal, but I think there's games that have achieved that. So I think Tetris is the most pure thing you can get to game design. So you have to look at, that's what we were kind of talking about, how some games and some art pieces go to the furthest corner. You have to do that. That's just good exercise, but you also have to come back. And that's one problem with the art world right now, is we're still stuck in what we call postmodernism, which ended in the 1990s. We're actually in a new age right now called internet art, which isn't art about the internet, it's art that happened after internet. And the problem with that is that we're being closed-minded and we're losing some of the most creative minds in the world, or I say less, like, I'm so part of the fine art world, it's fun. So we're basically stuck. And I think that video games is a new medium that once we take that all away, if we have the due diligence to look ahead and pull back, we can help art, fine art out of its rut too. So we're stop making art just for art's sake and making art for what it should be for, which is to communicate and unite all of us, to leave our mark on this planet and have a deep, empathetic history.